Chapter 599. Movie Queen and walked out, glancing outside before asking Admiral Qin, "What is she here for?" "She wants to plead for our son." As General Qin spoke, he stretched out his hand and pulled the man over. Movie Queen and shook her head solemnly. "There's no hope for her, our son doesn't care about relationships. Alright, how's your gaming practice going?" "A little more." Admiral Qin pretended to be troubled. "I can't use my skills properly." At this moment, Deputy Li had returned. As it turned out, Adjutant Li was a good adjutant who understood the thoughts of his superior. He didn't mention anything about the boss killing 3 people in one go in the game. Instead, he wisely retreated to the living room. Movie Queen and sat down the moment she heard Admiral Qin's words, exuding the aura of an expert. "I'll teach you." "All right." General Qin replied calmly. He wanted to change the method. Sometimes games weren't necessarily a bad thing. However, Movie Queen Anne's next sentence made him unhappy. "Once you've mastered it, I'll get Gio to carry us." "Gio? The one who often carries you in the game?" Admiral Qin asked calmly. Movie Queen Anne nodded as she swiped the screen. Admiral Qin arched a brow. It seemed like he had to find a chance to meet Gio in the game. Fu Gio had no idea she was being watched by Admiral Qin. The moment the news of the trial came out, she called Li Minggran. Life imprisonment, just like what the Almighty said, they won't be able to leave the prison for the rest of their lives. Li Minggran didn't know how to describe the feeling. She had been sitting in front of the television watching the news. When so many people questioned her on why she hadn't stepped out, her heart had turned cold. But the moment Almighty Qin stepped out, she couldn't care less. She no longer cared about the outcome of the 2 beasts. Li Minggran laughed lightly. "Your Highness Gio, you guys are really alike." "Us?" Fu Gio arched a brow. Li Minggran glanced at the ceiling. "You and Almighty Qin, you guys are really alike. At the start, I even thought of dying. I kept posting on the forums. The only reason I was able to persevere for so long was because of what you said in front of the camera. I'm glad I've seen your justice. You weren't brave enough." Fu Gio looked up at the police officers not far away and lowered her voice. "Minggran, there's something I want to ask you. What's that forum called? Who else has contacted you on the forum?" Li Minggran didn't understand the youngster's question. "Almighty Qin has asked me about this. It seems like the police are concerned too. Your Highness Gio, is there a problem with the forum?" "I'm just curious why you're so obsessed with a forum." Fu Gio's explanation was always flawless. Li Minggran lowered her voice. "Because there will be people consoling me there, but it's not direct contact. They will reply to my post. I feel safe there, no one knows each other and I can spill my painful secrets. It's indeed a good place." Fu Gio narrowed her eyes, and her aura became dangerous. "If possible, can you send it to me so that I can have a look?" Chapter 600. It's a place to relax. Fu Gio turned back, her thin lips curling up in a natural manner. After answering Qin Mo's question, she said to the other end of the line, "Minggran, I'll hang up first. Remember to send me the exact location." Qin Mo watched as Fu Gio placed her phone back into her pocket, his gaze deepening. This was the first time he realized that even if the youngster left, he wouldn't be able to control his actions. "The National League is in 3 days, yet you're still thinking of a place to relax." Qin Mo's tone was slightly hooked, his entire aura chilling. "Seems like I haven't given you enough training." Fu Gio opened her mouth, but before she could say a word, she was dragged into the sports car. Fu Gio realized that the Almighty's driving speed was really fast. So fast that she felt as though he was going to crash into something in the next second. Qin Mo's eyes were filled with malice. As soon as he heard the youth say the 2 words, "Minggran," he couldn't control himself. Qin Mo knew very well that the most difficult thing to forget was first love. But even so, he was still jealous. He was starting to worry that if the youngster couldn't resist looking for Li Minggran again, what would he do? The moment he thought of this, Qin Mo's heart felt as though it was being stung by an invisible force. Bang! That was the only feeling he had. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. In the end he calmed himself down. And Qin Mo's standard for calming himself down was that he wouldn't give the youngster a chance. You could call him domineering or selfish. He wanted to keep him by his side and slowly break him down. Fu Gio couldn't understand why the Almighty was looking at her with such a gaze. How should she put it? It was murderous and dangerous. He was probably still angry at her for making a move. At this moment, the phone in her pocket vibrated. Fu Gio tilted her head to look. There was only one word: redemption. She didn't hesitate, opening the webpage to search for the forum that Li Minggran had sent her. But at this moment, Fu Gio realized that the forum wasn't accessible to just anyone, it required an invitation code. Fujio was almost 100% sure that there was something wrong with the forum. That was because most forums would open up this function to visitors. But this forum had extremely high requirements for members. This was not normal. Anyone who made a forum on the internet wanted to increase the number of visitors and topics, which was also commonly known as traffic. However, once this kind of restriction was made, it would mean that a large portion of the traffic would be lost. Then how could its profits be high? Even if they needed an invitation code, there would still be a lot of people wanting to join. Fujio knew that there were two types of situations. One was that some pornographic forums were afraid of being caught, so they needed this kind of invitation code. The other was the hackers' exclusive forum, which required an invitation code to enter. However, it was obvious that this forum was not one of them. What concerned Fujio the most was that even under such circumstances, the number of visits to the forum was surprisingly high. If it was as Li Minggran had said, everyone here would share their painful secrets here. Then the existence of this forum itself was a negative product. Psychologists have long done research. If you are with someone who is depressed, the chances of you becoming depressed are far greater than the chances of that person becoming optimistic. Chapter 601. The moment she saw the forum, Fujio's hands itched to crack it, but with the Almighty beside her, she couldn't do anything. Qin Imo knew the youngster was looking at his phone. But from his angle, he could only see the youngster's side profile and his eyes, which were covered by his silver hair. He stared at the screen without replying, as though he couldn't bear to part with her. Was he that reluctant? Qin Imo gripped the steering wheel, swerving to the side of the road, his voice deep. Fujio. The youngster glanced up. I'll give you another chance. Qin Imo tilted his head to light a cigarette, fiddling with the lighter. His gaze wasn't on Fujio. This is the last time. Are you going to choose Li Minggran or the National League? Fujio didn't hesitate. She wasn't sure why the Almighty would ask such a question. She replied decisively, the National League. Qin Imo tilted his head, emphasizing each word. Then we'll cut off contact and prepare for the competition. All right. Fujio kept her phone. She hadn't agreed to Li Minggran's matter, she had told herself to stop for the time being. This case had affected her too much, making her forget that other than Z, she was still Fujio. Fujio had friends and family, she had many responsibilities to bear, the most important of which was winning the National League. Qin Imo watched the youngster's face, his gaze sinking. He had given him a chance to escape. Just this once. In the future, even if he couldn't bear to part with her, he wouldn't be soft-hearted. It was time to subtly influence the youngster, telling him how bad girls were and that finding a boyfriend was the most reliable thing. The third step of turning gay was getting used to it. To get used to it, he had to find a reference. There were plenty of pure young masters. But Qin Imo didn't want the youngster to see it. Firstly, he was worried the youngster wouldn't be able to accept it, and secondly, he was worried the youngster would sense something and hide. Hence, he had to find someone ambiguous. Qin Mo's eyes dimmed, and he turned the car around discreetly. Fujio arched a brow. Brother Imo, where are we going? A university. Qin Mo's voice was calm. It's been a long time since I last played in school. Xuanhu and Lin Feng shouldn't have any classes, let's form a team. Hearing that, Fujio's interest was piqued. I heard that those two live in the same dormitory. Are we going to the dormitory to catch them? MMH, Qin Imo replied. There wasn't any sign of it, but the corners of his lips curved up slightly. As a high school student, Fujio really wanted to go to the university dormitory to have a look. After all, she didn't have that kind of experience in her previous life. As the capital of the country, a university was no different from an ordinary university except for the trees. Some of the buildings were even older than some of the newly built universities, which also symbolized the school's long history. Usually, a university would be especially lazy and quiet at 4 p.m. But today it was the complete opposite. Ever since Fujio and Qin Imo stepped into the school, the screams hadn't stopped. It was because these two people were too eye-catching. Even though Fujio was wearing a black mask, it couldn't hide her handsomeness. Needless to say, Qin Mo's fingers moved slightly as he walked, sending a message to Xuanhu. That handsome and abstinent side profile had already been taken by countless people. Originally, the basketball player on the basketball court wanted to take advantage of Xuanhu's break to shoot a three-pointer to attract the cheers of the junior girls. He didn't expect that even after he threw the ball, no one would look at him. Chapter 602. The commotion caused wasn't small. Even Xuanhu, who was drinking mineral water, glanced over. He wouldn't have known if he hadn't looked, but after that, he understood why the crowd was so crazy. But it was strange. Why did Captain want to come to a university? The moment Xuanhu stood up, the person behind him threw the basketball in his hand. Young Master Yun, where are you going? Just say it if you're afraid. What he had said. Xuanhu wasn't the only one who heard it. The surrounding audience could hear it too. Of course, that included Fu Jiao and Qin Mo. The two of them weren't seated. One was wearing a black mask while the other had a hand in his pocket. They stood there, tall and slender, arching their brows. The man didn't notice the subtle atmosphere. Instead, he took a step forward and pointed. Since you chose to major in programming, you should be a good otaku. What's so great about playing games? Don't go around seducing girls just because you're handsome, understand? Xuanhu glanced back, looking at him. I don't understand. You. The person scoffed. You won't listen to my advice? Then let's fight on the court. What's the meaning of not going on the court? Xuanhu gave him a dumb *SS look, continuing to walk forward, as though he was saying that he didn't want to go on the court because he wasn't worthy. The person was infuriated, his eyes narrowing. I think you only know how to follow behind Lin Feng. Are you having fun being gay? With that, Xuanhu placed his backpack down, his gaze icy. What? You want to hit me? The person slapped his face, inching closer to Xuanhu. Go ahead, if you hit me you can forget about attending the National League. You'll be happy even if you're banned, right? Pang. Before the person could finish his sentence. Then a basketball flew over from the audience's seats. It landed squarely on his knee. He was in so much pain that his face changed. He hugged his leg and screamed, "Damn it! Who is it?" As he spoke, he glanced in the direction of the basketball. The silver-haired youngster stood in the crowd, brushing his black mask, his gaze dark. Sorry, my hand slipped. Ew. The person wanted to rush over. Another basketball flew over. This time it wasn't his leg that was hit, but his face. Bang. That person fell backward with a thud. The dizziness in front of his eyes was simply too much. His hand touched his nose, a red. Damn it. Who was it this time? The moment the man sat up, Yi Zichen looked at him. The main culprit, Qin Mo, had already walked to his side. He said faintly, my hand is slippery too. People who play games usually have slippery hands. You guys. That person was about to curse. Xuanhu tugged his jacket. Didn't you want to pick? Come on. The surrounding people knew that Xuanhu was going to be angry today. Actually, Xuanhu had already mentioned that he wouldn't be playing during this period of time because the National League was around the corner. He didn't want any accidents to happen to his hand. But today this person had obviously touched Xuanhu's reverse scale. Brother, we can't do it. Since they were all from the programming department, they were really afraid that these sports students would do something. What's more, with their skills, how could they beat the other team? Softening before the battle even began. Xuanhu frowned. Chapter 603. Xuanhu's first reaction was to look at Qin Mo. It wasn't a good time to do any sports, especially when the opponent was likely to play black ball. Feng Yi had been reminding them not to get into conflict with others in the heat of the moment. He could play alone and bring Little Spade. If something really happened, Supreme Alliance would lose two main players. But Little Spade had already taken off his jacket, and their captain didn't seem to want to stop him. Xuanhu opened his mouth, wanting to remind him. You have never played together before. Qin Mo's voice was calm. Treat basketball as an esports game in practice. Xuanhu was smart enough to agree in a low voice. Okay. With Qin Mo's words, Xuanhu relaxed. Sometimes, the experience of a team could be accumulated not only from the esports game, but also from the little things. Fu Jiao had already picked up a basketball. Before she went on the court, she decided to tease the Almighty. Brother Mo, do I get a reward if I win? Qin Mo looked at the youngster who was approaching him and suddenly smiled. Of course. Then I'll work harder. Fu Jiao thought that according to the Almighty's character, the reward must be very valuable. She would feel sorry if she didn't win. The troublemaker saw Fu Jiao on the court, rubbed his face and said viciously, let's show him what it means to play basketball. Don't worry, he's just a small guy. If I hit him, his whole arm will be broken. Obviously, just as Xuanhu had guessed, this wasn't going to be a friendly match. Many people in the audience were already worried about the youngster. Can he really do it? He's so thin, I feel like he'll be sent flying. I think you should worry about whether he can shoot well or not. With his height, he'll be blocked under the basket. That's why senior brother Yun found such a helper. I'm so worried. Swoosh. The crisp sound of the ball kickoff interrupted the whispers of the audience. Both sides snatched the ball. Yunhu's jump gave him an absolute advantage. With a tilt of his hand, he hit the ball to his teammate. Unfortunately, his teammate's technique was so bad that he only ran 3 steps before the ball was knocked away. Trash. As he dribbled, he didn't forget to glance at Xuanhu in disdain. Come brothers, let's win this round. Just as he was feeling proud of himself, he saw a figure with a half-bent waist swept past his left side with a swoosh. The figure's speed was very fast, so fast that no one could react, and the ball in their hands was gone. Bastard. That person cursed and quickly retreated to defend. But it was too late. Swoosh. He dribbled the ball perfectly and hit the bullseye. Then the young man landed on the ground, his silver hair fluttering in the wind, looking indescribably handsome. Instantly, the entire audience was in an uproar. It was too fast. It was too fast. The sports students of a university were not weak. In fact, they were among the best in the university league. The reason why that person often caused trouble for Xuanhu was because he had lost to Xuanhu in the past. He wanted to pull Xuanhu into his team, but he was rejected. Hence, because of this, he couldn't help finding trouble with Xuanhu. Every time he would lose and he wouldn't learn to behave. In the past, Xuanhu didn't have anyone to cooperate with him. It would be very strenuous to fight a battle. But today the situation was obviously different. Chapter 604. F***ck so handsome? How can he be so handsome? Where did senior brother Yun find this person? Calm down, let's form a team and get his WeChat number. My nose is going to bleed. Hearing the cheers around them, those sports students clenched their fists, especially the opposing team's captain. Watch that kid. Hit him. With such a strategy. Fujio was blocked by 4 people at the same time. Let's see how you survive now. That person's eyes were red, full of murderous intent. But at this moment, to everyone's surprise, the youngster took a step back. When his heels left the ground, his right hand made a beautiful arc swish. A clean 3-pointer. This time the audience really went crazy. Godly archer. Don't tell me that this handsome guy is a long-range player. That's not important, the most important thing is that he looks good. He was different from the girls. Chinamo wasn't looking at the face. He was looking at the fair skin at the waist when the youngster jumped. It was indeed good looking. If it was on the bed it would look even better. But he didn't want to share such good looks with others. Chinmo's eyes darkened. It seemed like he had to speed up some things. For example, using some extreme methods to turn someone gay, or announcing that someone was his from now on. At this moment, on the basketball court, the 2 teams were still fighting. This time that person was even more ruthless. He controlled Fujio from all directions, which meant that she didn't even have a chance to make a 3-pointer. It's over. The girls in the audience clutched their clothes, afraid that the youngster would take the ball away from his hand. Because in such a situation, once the youngster raised his hand, the ball would definitely be snatched away. The sports students thought that they were starting to turn the tables. But at this moment, the youngster threw the ball to the bottom right corner. The sports students laughed, thinking that he couldn't hold on any longer. But no one expected that just when they thought they would block the ball, Xuanhu would appear at that exact spot. With a beautiful step, he made a perfect layup. Swish. Another point. 3 consecutive wins. The sports students were really confused. They were so focused on guarding against the youngster that they forgot about Xuanhu. Soon they realized, it wasn't that they were confused. Instead, the 2 of them had actually figured out a way to team up in the previous match. While they were entangling this person, that person would follow them. In addition, the 2 of them had a lot of feints, so it was impossible to defend against them. Whoosh. As the last 3-pointer fell, the sports students had fallen behind by more than 20 points. Most importantly, the other side really only had those 2 players. The rest of the players were just passing the ball. Sometimes they would even lose the ball. In other words, they lost to the opponent in a 5v2? He had never been so humiliated before. The sports students looked at each other. In the end, they took their things and quickly left. On the other hand, Xuanhu wiped the sweat off his forehead. I didn't expect you to jump so high. That's nothing. Fujio wanted to be humble and admire her handsomeness. However, Chinamo walked over at this moment and said faintly, for a wall-jumping scholar, this is indeed nothing. Chapter 605. Even Fujio, who was always calm, didn't expect that the Almighty would do something like this. All she could smell was the familiar smell of tobacco and her slow heartbeat. All the noise was gone. Being hugged by the Almighty like this gave her an indescribable feeling. If she hadn't put her arms in front of her chest in time, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Just when Fujio let out a sigh of relief, the audience was dumbfounded. What was going on? Was it a celebration? But they had never seen a celebration like this. Xuanhu's hand paused and his expression was hard to describe. The world was big and there were fujoshis everywhere, especially on a university campus. Seeing such a scene, one would feel sorry for themselves if they didn't think about it. Soon there were discussions all around. Is that a couple? Looks like it. I have never seen such a handsome couple and they are so bold. TSK flaunting their love. What bold flaunting their love. Fujio wanted to tell those girls that they were thinking too much. But, Brother Imo, there are so many people here. Isn't it inappropriate to hug me like this? Fujio reached out to push him away. Chinamo didn't let go. Isn't this the reward you want? Fujio. So the reward the Almighty was talking about was this? What? You don't like me? The Almighty raised his eyebrows and when he turned his face to speak, his warm breath hit her ear. That look could easily make a girl blush and her heart beat faster. Right at this moment, an exclamation came from behind them. Captain, what are you doing? The person who exclaimed was none other than Lin Feng, who had rushed over angrily after hearing that the sports students were causing trouble again. He had even stopped writing his thesis. But he really didn't expect to see such a scene when he arrived at the scene. To be honest, he was very shocked. Chinamo, who was interrupted, slowly narrowed his eyes. Fujio finally found a reason to stop hugging him. She turned around and said to Lin Feng, "Don't think too much. This is the reward Brother Imo gave me." What reward? He just wanted to ask what the reward was that required a hug. Fujio, I won the basketball game. Lin Feng didn't believe him. He pulled him aside and said in a low voice, "Little Spade, tell me honestly, did you ask Captain for this reward?" Yes and no. Fujio looked back at the Almighty. Lin Feng shook his head. I thought you would give up on Captain after you got a girlfriend. I didn't expect you to still be so infatuated. But Captain is really nice. He didn't make you look bad even though he knows you have a crush on him. Crush? Fujio thought that it couldn't be. Could it be that her actions hadn't been cleared up by the Almighty? She thought that after such a long time together, the Almighty had already forgotten that she wanted to provide for him. As expected, it was hard to erase a dark history. Thinking about it this way, it made sense for the Almighty to give her a hug as a reward. After all, the Almighty had always been indulgent to his little brother. However, there is one thing that I have to remind you of. Although you will be very sad after hearing this news, Lin Feng said with a solemn expression. Fujio raised her eyebrows. What? Last night at the convenience store opposite Pure Color, Captain went on a date with a pretty girl. Lin Feng lowered his voice. And they were very affectionate. They kissed for a long time in front of us. Chapter 606. She didn't want to talk, she just wanted to be alone. Lin Feng saw the young man's silent expression and thought that Fujio was disappointed, so he comforted him. Don't be too sad, it's good to find a girl to date. You don't have to worry about Captain. Fujio still didn't move. Lin Feng saw this and sighed deeply. When the girl I like falls in love with who, I feel the same way. I understand you. Fujio, but why are you and Captain here? After gossiping, Lin Feng remembered the serious matter. Finally, there was a normal question, so Fujio found her voice. It was Brother Mo's idea to play games with you and Senior Xuanhu so that we can play together. Good idea. Lin Feng's eyes lit up. My head is swollen from writing my thesis. I didn't expect Captain to be so dedicated even though he has a girlfriend. Fujio heard this and paused. I don't think she is Brother Mo's girlfriend. He didn't introduce her to you like that, right? The Almighty just wanted to cover it up for her and accepted the kiss. Lin Feng looked at Fujio with a pitiful gaze. If this will make you feel better, you can comfort yourself. This child still has delusions in her heart. Fujio, what fantasies are you harboring? Chinamo walked over and looked at Lin Feng with a slightly cold gaze. Lin Feng was straightforward. What else? Little Spade still can't accept the fact that Captain has a girlfriend. When did I have a girlfriend? Chinmo's voice turned cold. Lin Feng bit his tongue hard at this moment. Well, I was just guessing, not taking it seriously. It was the beauty that Captain had a date with at the convenience store last night. Fujio wanted Lin Feng to shut up, but it was too late. After hearing Lin Feng's words, Xuanhu's expression became even more indescribable. He directly pulled Lin Feng to his side and cleverly changed the topic. It's almost 6 o'clock now. If you really want to train with the team, do you want to have dinner in advance? Okay, dinner is good. As Lin Feng spoke, he didn't forget to nudge Xuanhu with his shoulder. Good job, brother. Captain probably isn't willing to talk about what happened yesterday. Xuanhu glanced at the person who was 3 centimeters shorter than him. His face was extremely good-looking, even his eyes were round like a tiger's. He thought to himself, forget it, it's better for this guy to be a little stupid. As he thought of this, he couldn't help but pat Lin Feng's head. For people with completely different styles together, his actions were so loving. This was simply giving benefits to Fujoshis. The basketball court of a university could no longer hear anything other than the sweetness that surrounded their ears. Chinamo walked to Fujio's side and raised his eyebrows at the youngster. You can't accept me finding a girlfriend? Hearing this, Fujio felt that some things had to be explained. Otherwise, his dark history would never be washed away. Brother Mo, have you ever been at the age where you don't think before you do things, mistaking admiration for affection? Fujio opened her mouth, her eyes clear. Just like what I said before, keeping Brother Mo as my mistress was purely out of admiration. What I meant was... Chapter 607. Student Gio subconsciously felt that this question wasn't easy to answer. If she answered yes, it would be hurtful. If she answered no, the Almighty would misunderstand that she still had feelings for him. Chinamo looked at the youngster's slightly silent side profile and said, forget it, you don't have to say any more. With that, Chinamo took a step forward, his fingers clenching uncontrollably. Perhaps this was the only way he could suppress the pain in his heart. He didn't want to hear someone's answer. As for the person Chinamo was talking about, he looked at the cold back view in front of him and subconsciously touched the bridge of his nose. Lin Feng, who was sensitive in certain aspects, leaned over and looked at the 2 strands of silver hair on the youngster's head. Little Spade, what did you just say? Why do I feel like Captain is a little angry with you? The youngster glanced back at Lin Feng and said slowly, if you ever mention anything about me having a crush on him in front of me and Brother Mo again, I'll post the photo of you cross-dressing to a university's Chiba forum. Lin Feng said, no, Little Spade, you can't vent your anger on your brother even if you are upset. Just say it, did you confess to Captain and get rejected by him? F***ck, the silver-haired youngster turned back and said, say it again, post the photo. Lin Feng, that's why men shouldn't cross-dress. Even Little Spade could threaten him, seriously. The 4 of them walked in the school one after another. The other 3 were quiet except for Lin Feng, who tried his best to persuade the youngster so that his photo wouldn't be sold. That's why one shouldn't easily offend a boy who failed to confess. The consequences were terrifying. I feel that the atmosphere isn't right. After entering the cafeteria, Lin Feng jumped to Yunhu's side and whispered, do you think I should comfort Little Spade again? Yunhu grabbed onto her swiftly. I don't need it. Why, this is the time to show our team's love. Lin Feng's eyes were round. Yunhu glanced at him. With your IQ, the more you comfort, the colder the atmosphere will be. My IQ, what's wrong with my IQ? Before Lin Feng could finish his sentence, Yunhu spoke up again. The cafeteria has braised pork ribs today, do you want some? Eat, eat, eat. As a foodie, Lin Feng was also qualified. Where is it? Go queue up, maybe some juniors will give you a portion. Let's order more and let Little Spade know that a university's food isn't any worse than #1 middle schools. Yunhu really wanted to ask how a university student could compete with a high school student on canteen food. However, looking at the rogue-like appearance of this guy in front of him, his mood couldn't help but improve. Someone who can make you smile for no reason. It's not your own brain. Just because you like this person too much. Compared to the former reason, Yunhu believed in the latter. Without hesitation, he pulled her wrist and walked to the queue on the east side. Almost instantly, the girls who were getting their meals all pinched the meal cards in their hands. He was definitely excited. After all, the scene in front of them was a blessing for them. Do you see that? God Yun's doting smile. I knew I was being fed dog food again. Holding my little boy's hand and eating, it's too sweet. Chapter 608. It's true. An almighty Qin. Gosh. Big Spade followed Almighty Qin today, and he seemed very obedient. Was it an illusion? Absolutely not. In order to listen to their conversation, I inadvertently got a tomato scrambled egg from the line over there. My Big Spade kept asking the Almighty what he wanted to eat. Damn. I want to get a tomato scrambled egg too. That day, the line at the tomato scrambled egg window was especially spectacular. They all wanted to get closer to the youngster standing behind Chinamo. The canteen lady thought it was another celebrity who came to their school to film a reality show, like returning to school or something. My Big Spade is so obedient. I feel like I'm just short of putting my chin on the Almighty's shoulder and acting like a spoiled child. Listening to the noise around her, Student Jiu realized that she was indeed a little close to the Almighty. However, in order to eliminate the conflict, she had to keep up with the Almighty's pace. But the Almighty didn't seem to be very happy. The youngster thought for a moment, stopped, took out her phone, and very seriously typed a few words on the official Weibo. My good brother is angry. How do I pacify him? I have to believe in the power of the fans. There must be a good way. Honestly speaking, not many of the girls were really getting their food. They all let the male students go in front, and their eyes swept over the youngster who was looking down at her phone. What's my big spade doing? Not getting his food? Not asking what Almighty Qin ate? Continue sprinkling sugar. It's so annoying to suddenly stop like this. I can't hear anything. Wait, my big spade didn't stop. Look at the official Weibo. When the girls in the canteen realized what was going on and looked at their phones, there were already a lot of comments under that message. Tell me, who is my good brother? It's probably Almighty Qin. As a student of a university, I swear on my honor that it's definitely him. Almighty Qin is walking in front, and my big spade is following behind. The two of them are getting food. My big spade must have done something wrong to make Almighty Qin angry. He's acting like he's coaxing his boyfriend. Big spade, listen to your sister. Hold your tongue and give the Almighty a kiss. That's right, bring out your aggressiveness and kiss him. The aggressive Gio had already gotten her food and was sitting on a chair in the cafeteria. Since she had to look at her phone, she coolly held her chopsticks in her mouth. However, these messages, how were they meant to coax a brother? Little spade, try this. It's braised pork ribs. Lin Feng carried a huge pile of things and sat opposite the youngster. On his left was Xuanhu. Hey, don't you think the surrounding girls are more excited than before? Moreover, all of them were pressing on their phones. Usually, they would be taking pictures at this time. Why weren't they taking pictures today? That's weird. Am I not handsome enough today? Don't worry, you're very handsome. Because they're replying to my question on my official Weibo, they don't have time to take pictures. Classmate Gio replied in her heart, her eyes drifting a little. Chinamo sat there with an indifferent expression. He glanced at the youngster who was also tapping on his phone. Then he scanned the surroundings. He glanced sideways and tapped on the phone screen on the dining table. His official Weibo account had just been automatically logged in. Chapter 609. Chinmo's fingers paused. He hadn't expected the youngster to post such a post. It seemed like a certain someone didn't completely disregard him. But Chinmo lifted his lids and glanced at the fluffy head beside him. He dialed his phone to the side without a change in expression. He wasn't going to be a good brother. Why do I feel like there are more and more people watching us? Lin Feng dipped into the rice in his hands while giving Yunhu a look. Hurry up and eat before leaving. Amich, Yunhu replied faintly. Give me a piece of pork ribs. Here. Lin Feng wanted to place the pork ribs on Yunhu's plate. What he didn't expect was that as soon as he raised his chopsticks, the other person leaned over and bit down on the ribs on his chopsticks. Lin Feng looked at the sharp face in front of him. Wasn't it too close? What's wrong? Yunhu arched a brow. Lin Feng felt that he was making a fuss. They grew up wearing the same pair of pants, how could they be close? Nothing. He continued eating and didn't forget to steal the braised pork from Yunhu's plate. He only had eyes for food and didn't notice that their interaction was more intimate than a couple. This was the effect Yunhu wanted. He lifted the corner of his lips. It was full of tricks. Student Gio didn't see this scene. She was still focused on waiting for her reply. But regardless of whether she scrolled forward or backward, she just grabbed onto the Almighty and kissed him. How was she going to tell her little cuties that she had already kissed the Almighty? Even though the Almighty was the one who initiated it, every time he kissed her, the Almighty's gaze seemed to want to kill her. In the end, he probably didn't throw her into the rubbish bin because she was his little brother. It seemed like she could only think of a solution when they were playing games. As for the youngster's behavior of burying her head in food after putting down her phone, the surrounding girls expressed that even though she was cute, she didn't kiss the Almighty. She didn't seem sincere in coaxing him. Student Gio saw it and replied, I'll coax him when there's no one else. I'm shy in front of so many people. Of course, Chinemo saw the reply as well. He arched a brow. She would be shy in front of so many people, right? Then he would wait until there was no one around and see how this guy would coax him. As soon as he put down the phone, the screen lit up and vibrated. At a table, 4 people looked in that direction. The caller ID was from Director Huang. That police chief? What was he looking for the captain for? This was Lin Feng's first reaction. Yunhu was different from him. He had already vaguely known some things, but he continued to eat in silence. Hey! Chinemo stood up, one hand holding onto his phone, the other shoved into his pocket as he strolled into a corner. Chapter 610. Chinemo didn't speak at the start. Until Director Huang couldn't wait any longer. He spoke, I suspect someone is guiding Li Mengran to commit suicide. What? Suicide? Director Huang bolted upright. What does that mean? Isn't it a sexual assault case? Why is it suicide? Qin Mo tilted his handsome face. Have you seen the contents of the forum? Director Huang frowned. Speaking of which, it isn't easy to enter the forum, it requires an invitation code. If you hadn't gotten Fatty's help, it would have taken some time. Qin Mo lowered his gaze. I'm asking about the content. The content is simple. Director Huang paused. It's a normal topic but it makes me uncomfortable. Qin Mo's voice was calm. According to Li Mengran's description, everyone there is complaining about their pain and dissatisfaction. A psychological research conducted by Yale University found that bad emotions are like a cold, they can spread rapidly through the telepathy between people. Once a person comes here they won't be healed, instead they will go to extremes. Psychological guidance can easily make people lose faith in the world. The maiden's sacrifice has two meanings, one is Li Mengran's ID and the other is a prediction of suicide. But due to certain reasons, Li Mengran gave up on the idea of suicide and chose to resist. What was the reason? Director Huang stilled, he had never expected the situation to be so complicated. Qin Mo's gaze deepened. For example, a sudden confession. Director Huang paused for a few seconds. Are you serious? Qin Mo remained silent. Director Huang started to panic. Hurry up and get the person who confessed to her to coax her, what if she takes it too hard? Qin Mo tightened his grip, his voice sinking. She's fine now, what's the point of coaxing her? Inexplicably, the phone in Director Huang's hand turned cold. It must be his imagination. All right, as long as she's fine. Director Huang didn't have high expectations. To him it was a good thing that no lives were lost. Should we follow the clues and continue searching for Z? Alright, speaking of Z, I have some good news. In recent years, our key case investigation unit has been cooperating with the Investigation Bureau. The information that we couldn't find back then has been verified. In Z's first case, the girl who passed away that you locked onto did have a very good friend. However, that person didn't really appear in school at that time and was quite a loner. Ever since that incident, she disappeared and never appeared again. There were very few clues left behind, not even a photo. It fits your deductions of Z at that time. Unfortunately, it's a little too late to find out. However, I already have her real name here. Qin Mo wasn't paying attention. Z's name wasn't important to him. Because no matter what the other party's name was, it was just a code name. But just as he was about to hang up, Director Huang's voice came over clearly. Her name is Bo Jio, Bo as in fickle and Jio as in 90. Bo Jio? Also called Jio? Qin Mo's gaze paused and he looked towards the youngster instinctively. Chapter 6:11. But at this moment, classmate Jio didn't reply to the message. Because she received an email on her phone. That email had been mentioned a long time ago. Besides Hoshino, no one else would know. The content of the email was very concise. There was only one short sentence. The police have already found your information when you were in school. They should know your real name by now. Be careful. The last sentence was what Hoshino wanted to tell Z the most. Until now, Z hadn't told him where she was. It was probably because the time wasn't right. But Hoshino had already sensed that something was amiss. Why would the police suddenly start investigating Z's whereabouts? And this time, it was so aggressive that they couldn't guard against it. It wasn't like before. He was worried that something would happen to that person. Vice Captain. A youngster at the side nudged Hoshino's arm. The host is asking you who were you texting with? You were so engrossed. Hoshino laughed, his professional uniform made him look like a Star Trek commander. If I say it's someone I have a crush on, will I lose fans? Someone you like. It wasn't just the host, even the youngster's eyes widened. What kind of joke was that? Besides sleeping, Vice Captain was a handsome otaku who only knew how to play games and stretch. How could he have a crush on someone? Almighty Hoshino, you sure know how to joke. The host thought he was joking. After all, how could such a man have a crush on someone? The moment he asked, the other party would agree. Alright, in case Almighty Hoshino doesn't answer the question properly, let's ask about esports. The host passed the microphone over. Our national competition has started, the champions of the 12 countries will be competing. Almighty Hoshino, which team from our country left the deepest impression on you? Hoshino didn't need to answer such a question. The youngster beside her laughed. Babe, we have only competed with Xianhuan, we haven't interacted with the other teams yet. Let's wait for the next time before commenting. The host agreed with him. In terms of esports, China had always been at the middle level. But the Japanese were the cream of the crop. Even Xianhuan was average in front of them, let alone the other teams in the country. The MC didn't mean to belittle any team. On the contrary, she was a fan of Supreme Alliance for many years. When she heard his reply, she even wanted to say that there was a team that could have defeated the Japanese team. It was just that Almighty Qin's whereabouts were unknown at that time, and when he returned he was injured. She still remembered the appearance of that person at his peak. He took on 5 people by himself, and even after the team was wiped out, he could still return to the city with low health. He was as fierce as the wind. But now, she was worried that Almighty Qin's hand hadn't fully recovered. Otherwise, Almighty Qin wouldn't have been using support attacks all this time. The second hand moved bit by bit. At the same time, in a university's cafeteria, after the youngster finished reading the email, he knew very well that the police had found out his real name because the Almighty was behind all this. In other words, it was very likely that the Almighty had already obtained all of her information. That was right. Bojio. This was the real her. She was born in the darkness. It was time to use her real name again. The youth raised his head, his eyes dark to the extreme. Because that was the only way she could be complete. It was neither completely black nor completely white. 0 with the name of Z. Chapter 6:12. Not far away, Qin Imo hadn't hung up the phone. Director Huang noticed his pause. Why aren't you saying anything? Did you discover something? No. Qin Mo's eyes were still fixed on the youngster, his gaze as deep as the ocean, so deep that one couldn't see the end of it. His voice was calm. But there is one thing, Z might not be the one coming this time. It's not Z. Director Huang was shocked. That can't be. With such a style and that message, it's impossible. The crime style can be imitated and the message can be faked. You mean someone is impersonating Hacker Z? Director Huang's head hurt. Why was the case so complicated? What's the basis? Qin Mo's thin lips quivered. There's no basis. He was someone who had always been particular about evidence, but this time, he had come to a conclusion without any basis. What exactly was the reason for this? Director Huang asked in confusion. Qin Mo's side profile didn't change, as though he was stating a fact. Because the Real Z wouldn't lead a victim to suicide. Director Huang paused before replying. I know you used to pity Z and wanted her to be your partner, but no matter how pitiful she is still a criminal and no one can predict her next move. Even you have said that some people aren't originally devils, but after coming into contact with the dark side for a long time, they will turn into a devil. The last time you fought was 3 years ago. You were still in your 3rd year of high school then. In 3 years you have changed, and perhaps she has changed as well. Qin Imo remained silent. Director Huang sighed. Since you are so insistent, we will investigate further. We really need you this time. That kind of forum can't exist anymore. It wasn't scary to see the real culprit, it was to use a forum and words to induce someone to commit suicide. Moreover, he had seen some posts on the forum. Some of them had even turned violent, threatening to let everyone around them die and so on. Hence, regardless of who the culprit was, they had to find the culprit as soon as possible. As for whether this person is impersonating Z, it isn't important to this case. That was Director Huang's opinion. Qin Imo paused, his voice faint. No, it's very important. If the other party is really an imposter, we have to investigate why he impersonated Z. Every action of the criminal is related to the criminal himself. This is common knowledge in criminal psychology. Director Huang. This kid. Was he saying he had no common sense? Z. After saying this name, Qin Imo paused slightly before continuing. How old were you then? Is this also common knowledge in criminal psychology? Director Huang flipped through the documents. Same age as you, 18 years old, Gemini, born on June 6th. Other than these, there's nothing else. 3 years ago he was 18. The young man in front of him was only 17 years old. Their ages didn't match. His family background matched as well. Even though Z was Chinese, he lived in the 5th Avenue. The youth was in Jianghu City. But Qin Imo couldn't explain that feeling. When this man first appeared, he felt a chill run down his spine. Chapter 6:13. That was why he sent Fatty to track them. But it turned out that this was not the case. Qin Imo hung up the phone, stuffing one hand into his pocket as he looked in the youngster's direction. No one knew what he was thinking. But after about 3 seconds, he picked up his phone again and dialed a number. Help me investigate someone. Okay, Captain, who do you think we should investigate? Fatty loved to do this kind of thing. Is it related to the police? Qin Mo's gaze deepened. No, it has nothing to do with the police. Chekjio. Who? Fatty thought there was something wrong with his ears. He dropped his fork that was eating instant noodles. Qin Mo's voice didn't change. You didn't hear wrongly. Investigate Jiu from the beginning. Inform me of all the details. No, Captain, what's going on? Why are you investigating Little Spade all of a sudden? Fatty didn't understand. Qin Mo only gave him 2 words. Go and investigate. Fatty knew very well that he couldn't afford to offend the captain at this time, and he also knew that if this matter wasn't even reported to the police, it must be a very important matter. What exactly did Little Spade do? Why did the captain suddenly become like this? Fatty did not dare to ask again. He could feel that it was best not to ask this question. At this time, the youngster had decided to use her identity as Bo Jiu, her real name. He made this decision because the time had come. From the beginning, Jiu knew that once she used her hacking skills again, the Almighty would suspect her one day. Now the day had come. As expected. But she didn't want to break the current relationship between her and the Almighty. Therefore, the only thing left to do was to stall for as long as possible. At the very least, she had to wait until she won the National League before she admitted her identity. After recovering her identity, she was clearer about her position. The Almighty wouldn't notice her immediately. This was because not many people would think of reincarnation. With that in mind, Bojo smiled. It was a handsome smile. This time, who would win, her or the Almighty? No matter who won. She believed that she would never forget that back view that was as straight as a pine tree. Even if they weren't in the same trench, even if they were enemies. She was happy to. Because her opponent was him, who had perfect values, not anyone else. At that time, even Z himself didn't know. In her world. What did it mean for an opponent to become so important? With Qin Mo's skills, no one would know what call he had received. When he walked back, he had already put his phone away. He had one hand in his pocket, which only made people feel his natural handsomeness. The girls couldn't help tagging their big spade. Seeing Almighty Qin like this, don't you want to kiss him? Shut up, my big spade is shy and kissing in private. Other than kissing, we can do something else. After all, Big Spade boast of being the attacker. Let me say this weakly. Usually, only the ones who are on the receiving end will emphasize that they are on the offensive over and over again. In short, Lil Shou is trying to coax her boyfriend. Even throwing a tantrum seems like they're showing off their affection. I need some peace and quiet. The atmosphere in the cafeteria was closely related to the official Weibo. After Lin Feng finished his meal, he couldn't take it anymore. He pulled Yunhu out. Chapter 6:14. The 4 of them left the cafeteria and went to the internet cafe near the school. It was rare to see such a good-looking combination. Even the cashier couldn't help but look up at the 4 of them. They were both men, but why was he so ugly to look at? Fortunately, the cashier didn't play hero, so he didn't know them. Otherwise, they would have been surrounded the moment they entered. Due to the development of a mobile version of Hero, more and more people were familiar with this game. From office workers to primary school students, they really formed a group to hate him together. As a student, especially a computer science student, he had an extraordinary passion for esports. Hence, there were many Supreme Alliance fans in the internet cafes near a university. Under normal circumstances, Bo Jiu would either be biting on a lollipop or wearing her black mask. This child was not afraid of being recognized. Qin Mo's face was too recognizable. Thus, the 4 of them found an inconspicuous spot and sat in a row. Such a scene could only be felt by those who had been to an internet cafe. How should I put it? Because it was a team battle, there was an indescribable coolness to it. Holy sh*T, come and look. What is it? The video of Almighty Qin returning to the city with low HP after a 1v5. That's right. Every large internet cafe would broadcast the esports competitions on the big screens on the weekends. Qin Mo's match was the most popular. If you want to know why it is popular, just play a game. In the 1v5, when he had killed 3 of the opponents, he had been at critical health. He had thought that the Almighty would be killed in the next second. However, he actually entered the bushes, shifted his position, turned around, and used a big move to kill the one in front. Then he recovered his health, shifted again, and continued to kill. Quintuple kill, team wipe. That kind of operation, even if it was replayed, would still make people burn with excitement. Handsome. The one and only male idol doesn't need to explain. I just want to know how Almighty Qin did it. I also play the hero that Almighty Qin plays. Don't you think that the hero you play is very ordinary? Any champion in Almighty Qin's hands is like a cheat code. He can move his position accurately. You have to get used to it. At this moment, these people didn't know that Qin Mo was here. If they knew, they would go crazy. Bojo was watching the video as well. When she reached the last point, she frowned. It isn't an issue of positioning. Little Spade is smart. As Lin Feng moved the mouse, he didn't forget to speak into his earpiece. Ordinary people can't tell. At that time, I also thought it was a problem with the positioning. Later, I heard from the captain that he had calculated everything beforehand. He used geometric formulas to calculate. What a crazy genius. Bo Jiao turned towards the Almighty, who was seated beside her. That person was wearing headphones and had a cigarette between his lips. Even when he was playing games, he looked very abstinent. When he saw the young man, he looked at him again. Qin Mo removed his headphones and looked into the youngster's eyes. Sitting together, the two of them were much closer than usual. Everyone knew about the chairs and internet cafes. Basically, their arms were touching each other. Moreover, Qin Mo was in this position. Their auras seemed to be able to blend together. They were so close that it was a little ambiguous. However, this was not the main point. The key was the Almighty's words. Chapter 6:15. There was a loud bang. Bo Jiao only had one thought in her mind: she deserved it. But right now, she had clearly underestimated the Almighty's scheming. Since you're so aggressive, you shouldn't still be shy, right? Qin Mo arched a brow. Bo Jiao. Was this the price of being caught posting on Weibo? Fortunately, at this moment, Lin Feng shouted, "Captain, the middle lane." Qin Mo frowned, putting his earpiece back. His left hand gripped the mouse and he turned invisible, gliding across the field, heading straight for the middle lane. He returned with a big move, crossing the tower. The opponent hadn't expected him to appear so suddenly. It was too late to kill him. On the other hand, one of his teammates had wanted to use the opportunity to chase the Almighty to the bottom of the tower, but he was instantly killed by the Almighty. Unexpectedly, the Almighty jumped and bounced back. 3 skills were critical hits. That person was instantly stunned. Lin Feng went forward, crouching with a big move. Double kill. Awesome. Captain, continue? It was said that Hero was a game that emphasized teamwork. What would it feel like to have a godlike assassin? It felt like killing all the way to the end. Pushing down the tower wasn't a big deal. They wanted to kill. Bo Jiao was taken aback by the Almighty's playing style. It was one thing to watch him play on the screen, but it was another to watch him move the mouse with her own eyes. Anyway, the Almighty could take on an entire team. Hence, Bo Jiao didn't leave the city. She held her chin mischievously, glancing sideways at Qin Mo while asking, "Brother Mo, have you never lost before?" Not only has he never lost, but he has also never died in the game. Lin Feng replied to the youngster, "Little Spade, why aren't you moving?" Bo Jiao smiled faintly. "If I move, it won't be fair to the opponent. You and the Almighty can have a 2v5. The moment she finished her sentence, the person on the other side who was killed seemed to be very unconvinced. He shouted the Almighty's alt account's name, "Assassin on the other side, just you wait." Just you wait? Bo Jiao thought to herself. He had to die. Qin Mo didn't say anything, but there was one thing. He stopped right in front of the tower and did not move an inch. The other party had sent 3 people at once. The leader snorted. Since he wants to die so badly, let's fulfill his wish. But who knew that just as he finished speaking, the person in front of him disappeared in a flash. F***ck invisibility? Before he could finish his sentence, a silver light pierced through his back and went straight for his vitals. This was the first move, the second was a deceleration critical strike, and the third was a retreat. All that could be heard was the sound of a KO. If one were to describe the Almighty's technique in one sentence, it would be that he could kill a person within 10 steps without leaving a trace. Most importantly, he only killed that person and didn't touch anyone else. From then on, he only caught that person. After killing the opponent 3 times, that person was so scared that he didn't even dare to leave the city. This was destined to be a loss. The other party's city protecting crystal was gone. However, some people were just stubborn. "Haha, you're awesome, you're awesome. If you have the ability, come to the city and kill me." As soon as he said this, Bo Jiao saw the Almighty move. First, he went invisible. Then he sprinted. Without anyone noticing, he used a big move, forcefully killing someone under the crystal. The other party's teammates would definitely surround the Almighty. Chapter 6:16. On the screen there were indeed 2 people sprinting out of the city heading towards Qin Mo. But Bo Jiao hadn't expected someone to be so fast when he returned. Just as she leaned over, intending to kiss the Almighty's cheek and create trouble for him, Qin Mo had finished dealing with the 2 people opposite him. Qin Mo had finished dealing with the 2 people on the other side. He sensed the youngster's approach and came over. In that instant the 2 of them froze in place. Because of his coincidental action, Bo Jiao leaned over and kissed his lips instead of his face. Instead, she kissed his beautiful lips. Both of them were really close. They sat on the chairs in the internet cafe, but their lips were stuck together. Bojio's dark pupils trembled. The touch on his lips was icy cold, with a familiar minty tobacco fragrance, soft and penetrating into his heart. Bojio could see the smile on the Almighty's lips, the strands of his black hair falling down. His thick eyelashes were bewitching, his slightly curled lashes tinged with a faint silver ash. His fair and tall nose bridge was like ancient jade and ivory. His lips were pale and pure, glistening like pearls. Coupled with his face full of lust, it was a captivating sight. Bojio couldn't describe her feelings, except for the clear sound of her heartbeat. It was the unique sound of the internet cafe's keyboard. But at this moment, even the sound of the keyboard seemed to have been hidden. The surroundings seemed to have quietened down. Lin Feng, who was sitting beside her, turned when he saw the 3 kills on the screen. He was just about to shout, "Cool," when he saw the scene he had never expected to see. Little Spade was extremely close to his captain. It wasn't just close, their mouths were touching. Looking at the scene in front of him, Lin Feng's mouth was wide open into the shape of an O. For a moment, his thoughts were in a mess. How could he have the time to care about his own game? He just sat there dumbfounded. He even forgot to move his mouse. He was petrified. And from the looks of it, Little Spade was the one who initiated it? What did Little Spade mean? Was he so upset that his captain had a girlfriend that he couldn't take it anymore and decided to make a move on him? Honestly, as someone who was often heartbroken, Lin Feng could understand the youngster's actions. But Little Spade, did it ever cross your mind that Captain would destroy you if you treated him this way? In Hero, the other party wasn't aware of the situation. When they saw the expert who had killed the 3 of them suddenly standing there motionlessly, they thought it was a trap. Hence, he had shot an arrow from afar. When there wasn't any reaction, he had hurried over and started shooting randomly at Chinemo. Finally, he had killed him. The sound of death came from the game, causing Bojio to retract herself. Chinemo continued to stare at the youngster. He didn't kill her like Lin Feng had said. Instead, his gaze deepened, glinting with an unfathomable glint. His brows were arched as though he was waiting for her to give him. This was the first time since the game. Bojio mows to kill him. Chapter 617. After that, both of them didn't move. In the noisy internet cafe, they sat shoulder to shoulder, looking at each other in the corner. Just as Chinemo had said, no one saw what the youngster did. Everyone was playing, clamoring for the top lane or the jungles. Only Lin Feng saw it. But that was why Lin Feng was even more shocked. Captain was actually kissed by Little Spade. He was kissed just like that. He wasn't angry. The music in the game was still blaring. The opponent was attacking. 5 of them were playing, but 4 of them didn't leave the city. Xuanhu reached out to tap his earpiece, his eyes still on the screen. Feng, go to the top lane to catch them. No one replied? Xuanhu glanced over, asking Lin Feng, why aren't you moving? Lin Feng grabbed Xuanhu and gestured for him to keep quiet. He lowered his voice and said, let me have some peace first. Who, do you know what I saw just now? Little Spade leaned over and forcefully kissed Captain. If Lin Feng had said this in the past, Xuanhu would definitely have believed him. But now Xuanhu didn't think so. Because the captain he knew wouldn't allow anyone to forcefully kiss him if he wasn't willing. Besides, Xuanhu was still suspecting that the girl in the convenience store was Little Spade. And recently, Captain's attitude towards Little Spade. He had never seen Captain being so indulgent towards anyone. Even though Captain had said that Little Spade was his younger brother, no one had ever treated his younger brother in such a manner. Hence, when Lin Feng started to speak again, Xuanhu pressed him down and turned to look over. At this moment, Qin Mo's gaze hadn't left the youngster. Bojio had a serious expression, looking a little annoyed. Brother Mo, believe me, this is just a coincidence. Qin Mo glanced at the youngster, placing down the mouse in his right hand. He asked slowly, the confession is a coincidence, saying that he wants to keep me is a coincidence, wanting to sleep with me is a coincidence, and now he's leaning over to kiss me is also a coincidence. Is this the explanation of a wall-jumping scholar? Lin Feng gave the youngster a stern look. Little Spade, stop being so stubborn. Is it that hard to admit that you like Captain? It's up to you whether you admit it or not. Everything you've done is enough to prove that you love our Captain to the extreme. You even dared to force a kiss in an internet cafe. I admire you. Bojio felt that she wouldn't be able to clear her name after the Almighty's words. She could predict the future just by looking at Lin Feng's eyes. Did this matter have to be so depressing? The Almighty in the game was indeed dead. But the price she had to pay was a little too high. Looking at the youngster's slightly depressed face, Qin Mo knew that it was just like what the youngster had said, it was just an accident. But the more he thought about it, the deeper Qin Mo's gaze became. The last thing he wanted to see was the young man wanting to explain himself and draw a line with him after kissing him. Chapter 6:18. What? Bo Jiao arched a brow. What else could she do? A kiss was a kiss. She couldn't let the Almighty kiss her again. Qin Mo lowered his breath. At that distance, his breath brushed past her lips. You have to take responsibility for kissing me, do you understand? Responsibility? The Almighty had kissed her twice, but she hadn't asked him to take responsibility. She had only kissed him once and he was asking her to take responsibility? Bo Jiao arched a brow, breaking into a smile. If Brother Imo doesn't mind, I can bring him home. When Lin Feng heard this, he covered his face. Little Spade, you still haven't changed your evil intentions towards Captain. Bo Jiao admitted her intentions since the Almighty wouldn't agree to it. But who knew that the Almighty's thoughts would always be like the weather forecast, never accurate. Sure. Two calm words, his voice filled with a familiar magnetism. It wasn't just Lin Feng, even Xuanhu turned over when he heard the reply. The player was still hooting. The opposing team must be stunned. This is our true ability, we were just letting you guys have your way. It was probably because his voice had affected the atmosphere at the moment. Qin Mo glanced over, grabbing onto the mouse once more. With a beautiful maneuver, he went invisible before launching a sudden attack, heading straight for the opponent's crystal. Ha again? That's how you died the last time, have you forgotten? It was obvious that the opposing team wanted to use the same method to kill the Almighty. But they hadn't expected it. This time, the other party's reaction was completely different from the last time. Not only did he kill a single person, he immediately killed a second person, then a third, a fourth, a fifth. 1 kill, 5 kills. Half a HP destroyed the city. The opposing team was completely dumbfounded. Who could tell them why the opposing team's standards were so high and low? Since they were so strong, why did they stand there and let them kill them 3 times? Were they playing with him? Of course they wouldn't have expected it. The reason Qin Mo stopped moving was because of the youngster's kiss. And the reason they were wiped out was because of the conversation between Almighty Qin and a certain someone. The game ended. It was very straightforward. Qin Mo reached for his jacket and glanced at her, his lips lifting into a devilish smile. Let's find a secluded place to talk about bringing me home. After all. Qin Mo paused, his voice slowing. You will be embarrassed in front of so many people. Bo Jiao, the Almighty's hobby was to use her words to shut her up. In the end, this was a trap from the very beginning. Furthermore, it was a huge pit that was extremely difficult to fill. Qin Mo didn't say anything else, he reached out to grab her wrist, wanting to drag her out. Suddenly, an image appeared on the big screen in the center of the internet cafe. It was none other than an esports host interviewing the Japanese team. The Japanese were the strongest team in Asia. If Xuanhuan was said to be China's ever-victorious team, in that case the Japanese would be a winning team in the international arena. In the past 10 years, Dongying had never lost a single battle. Chapter 6:19. Back then, the existence of the Japanese had ignited the esports craze in Asia. In the past, esports had never been called esports, it had been called gaming. But now, esports had gradually become a recognized profession. There were even schools that offered esports as a profession. This was all because of the Japanese team's appearance, and the Chinese had realized that gaming could also attract fans. That year, anyone who had been a gamer wouldn't have heard of the team. Even now it was the same. The fans of Heroes hadn't expected the Japanese to be invited to the National League. In that instant, the entire internet cafe was in an uproar. Did you see that? That's the legendary Hoshino who rarely shows himself. Do you know what he's best at? Triple kill at critical HP, a Grim Reaper wielding a scythe. Isn't the interview taking place in China? Gosh, I really want to know where they are right now. I would like to meet my idol. Wait, it seems like the Japanese aren't here as guests. After the National League, there will be an Asian League competition here, and the Japanese are here to represent their country in the competition. However, the Japanese are really shameless. Listen to what the host said. They said that they only know Xianxia in China, and that Xianxia is the only team they know. They haven't even heard of the other teams. It can't be helped, the Japanese are too strong. No one could understand the Japanese's strength better than the gamers. They were an unshakable existence. It wasn't surprising that they reacted in such a manner. Lin Feng and Xuanhu had been watching the video as well because they hadn't known there would be an Asian League after the National League. Therefore, after the host finished asking the questions, they put down the mouse in their hands one by one and looked at the interview on the screen, full of vigilance against a strong enemy. But it was obvious that Bojio wasn't. She looked at the people on the big screen without moving. He was dressed in a professional uniform, his legs long and slender, his features mesmerizing as he answered the host with a slight smile. If I say I send it to my crush, will I lose fans? Hoshino, Bojio paused instinctively, all her attention focused on him. She didn't notice the change in the Almighty's gaze the moment she stopped. When Chinemo followed the youngster's line of sight, he recognized the person on the screen immediately. Back in Tokyo. The young man stopped abnormally when he saw the image of this person. It was the same today. Once again, Chinemo could see the focus in the youngster's eyes. It was a focus that was different from when the youth looked at anyone else. It was as if even the bottom of his eyes would jump with light. That kind of light might not be easily discovered. But precisely because Chinemo had been watching her, he managed to catch it. Even he didn't seem to have that kind of focus. Chinemo slowly stuffed his hands into his pockets. He glanced at the youngster's side profile and then at the youngster who was staring at the screen. His head hung low and the stray hair on his forehead covered his eyes. Only his half-curled lips could be seen as if he was smiling. Chapter 620. This should be the first time the Japanese have made such a high-profile appearance. I didn't expect them to be so good-looking. Lin Feng stood up, walking towards them. I wonder if there will be any arrangements for the competition. Chinemo remained silent. Xuanhu glanced at him. Regardless, we just have to do our best. Of course. Lin Feng chuckled, turning towards the youngster. Little Spade has to resolve his conflict with Captain. If not, our main team members wouldn't be able to adjust their emotions and lose. Xuanhu didn't think it could be resolved so easily. There had to be an opportunity to clear things up. But the National League wasn't the time to talk about personal feelings. The appearance of the Japanese meant that this year's National League would be different from previous years. The skies outside darkened. Chinemo didn't hold the youngster responsible because he received another call. This time, it was from the hospital regarding his hand injury. Back then, Feng Yi had left Chinemo's doctor's phone number. Hence, both of them would be notified at the same time. After leaving the internet cafe, Chinemo headed to the hospital without telling anyone. But before he went to the hospital, he took one last look at the youngster and sent a message to Fatty. When you're investigating, check if he knows Hoshino. In the past, Chinemo wouldn't have bothered about anyone's friendship. Perhaps, even he didn't know why he was so concerned about the youngster's focus. Perhaps it was because Chinemo was familiar with the youngster's looks. Although he seemed gentle on the surface, his eyes had never been like that. That flickering darkness made him yearn for it. After watching the interview in the internet cafe, Bojio had indeed hidden her thoughts. She was wondering if she should acknowledge Hoshino. It was obvious that she wasn't the same as she had been in the past. Anyone who heard of such a thing would probably feel that it was absurd. She had been resurrected. And she had been reborn as a high school student. Even though she trusted Hoshino's ability to accept it, she still wondered if it was appropriate to acknowledge him. In the past, she never knew that Hoshino would choose to enter the esports industry after she left. In fact, if she thought about it carefully, Hoshino had said a long time ago that other than sleeping, the only other thing he loved to do was play games. Hoshino was different from him. There was no need for him to carry the burden of what she had to carry. The strength of the police this time was obviously different from before. Plus, the Almighty was here. Furthermore, China wasn't the Fifth Avenue, and it wasn't Tokyo either. The environment was bound to restrict their movements. If one day she was suspected, it wouldn't matter even if she went to jail. But Hoshino couldn't. She had to protect that person. That night, the First Central Hospital of River Town, the surgery building, 3rd floor. Chapter 621. I have to compete. After listening to the attending physician's words, Chinemo reached out and unrolled his half-rolled sleeves. The attending physician shook his head at his indifferent and handsome side profile. That was what Feng Yi heard when he arrived. His smiling eyes lost the light they had when he arrived. The last time he asked, Almighty Qin told him not to worry about his hand injury, so he thought it was already healed. But now that he thought about it, if he had recovered a long time ago, the attending physician wouldn't have asked him to pay more attention at that time. Feng Yi tightened his grip on the door handle and pushed it open. He ignored Chinmo's gaze and focused on the attending physician. Dr. Liu, I will let him rest according to what you said. Can you tell me how long he needs to rest? At least 3 months. 3 months. Feng Yi knew what this meant. The entire National League was only 20 days long. 3 months meant that Almighty Qin had to give up this year's competition. Seeing this, the attending physician paused for a moment before continuing. Of course, if you were to make a trip to America and ask the experts there, you might be able to save some time. They have a way to stabilize it, but even so, you'll still need at least a month of rest. The nerves in the hand are very sensitive. In addition to your profession, the more intense the competition, the more flexible the fingers and the strength of the wrist are required. His hand might not be able to withstand such a huge amount of pressure if he's concentrated for a long period of time. I know that the National League is very important to you, but no matter how important a competition is, it can't compare to the health of a hand. Feng Yi understood. Ever since he met Qin Mo, he knew he was born for esports. It was just that in the beginning, as a manager, he had too many flaws. That was why even though he had won the Most Valuable Player award, he had never won a team championship. It wasn't like Xianhuan didn't try to poach Almighty Qin back then. However, that person refused. He also took out a sum of money to strengthen the Supreme Alliance. From then on, the Supreme Alliance belonged to the Qin Corporation. He finally didn't have to go back to inherit the family business that he didn't like. He started to have his own direction and became one of the top esports agents in the country. However, he owed that person a national championship. He owed it from the very beginning. They had thought that with Spade Z this year, that person could finally return to his old playstyle. Feng Yi still hadn't forgotten the thought that prompted him to become a manager. It was the scene of that aloof youngster waving his mouse and wiping out the entire team in a 1v5. To be honest, at that time he had tricked the Almighty. Originally, he didn't have much experience as a manager. It was just that his family was in the entertainment industry, so he didn't know that esports and entertainment were different. Other than handling some things well, it was more important to find good teammates. Come to think of it, ever since the team battle, that person had never waved his mouse as unscrupulously as before. But when it came to working with Little Spade, Feng Yi lowered his lids. Dr. Liu is right. No matter how important the competition is, it can't compare to the health of a hand. Chapter 622. Yes, it isn't just a competition for Supreme Alliance, but you have to receive treatment. Feng Yi didn't back down. Head to America first and we can talk about the future. Qin Mo buttoned up his shirt slowly and stuffed his hand into his pocket. His gaze was deep. I'm not going. The attending physician let out a long sigh. Is winning or losing really that important? It's not a matter of winning or losing. When Qin Mo said this, he had already walked to the door. His voice was neither loud nor soft. I just don't want to leave behind any regrets. No matter if they won or lost. His biggest regret was not being able to participate. He had said that he wanted to lead Supreme Alliance to the national championship and not be absent when Supreme Alliance lost. Regardless of whether he could continue his career in the future, he couldn't leave now. Of course, Feng Yi knew what Qin Mo was thinking. He knew he couldn't persuade him. But he couldn't let things develop like this. Looking at the tall and straight back disappearing at the end of the corridor. The more Feng Yi thought about it, the more likely candidate was Bo Jiao. He knew better than anyone else who Almighty Qin had kissed at the masquerade party. He also knew that to Almighty Qin, that young man was different from anyone else. After leaving the hospital, Feng Yi called the youngster. This was the first time he didn't follow Qin Mo's instructions. The night outside was dark and gloomy. His voice had also changed. He was no longer the old fox. There's something I need to talk to you about. When she received the call, Bo Jiao had just reached home. She was biting on the zipper of her jacket and preparing to remove her clothes. When she heard Feng Yi's words, she paused. Without asking, she stuffed a hand into her pocket, her voice clear. Sure, where do you want to meet? Feng Yi admired the youth's straightforwardness. At the same time, he knew very well that the youth was tight-lipped. In some ways, Spade Z and Almighty Qin had too many similarities. The most important thing in a match was who would set the pace. In order to convince Almighty Qin to treat his hand injury first, there had to be a fiery person to lead the Supreme Alliance. Xuanhu and Lin Feng weren't suitable. Spade Z was the only one who had never lost, just like how he had been when he first appeared. The night grew darker. Xianxia was still boiling soup when she saw her Jiao pull up the zipper of her jacket to the top and put on a pure black mask. Her gaze froze. Why did you go out as soon as you came back? Something came up last minute? Bo Jiao smiled faintly, her exposed eyes beautiful. Mom, I'll accompany you when I come back. Xianxia was very easy to coax. After hearing her Jiao's words, she instructed, It's cold outside and the smog is heavy. Wear another mask and clothes. Don't catch a cold. Jiao's body usually looked fine, but once he caught a cold, it would be worse than normal. That was why Xianxia was so nervous. But fortunately, now her economic conditions were better again. In addition, Jiao didn't go to those messy nightclubs anymore. Xuanhuan was relieved. Feng Yi arranged to meet at a coffee shop. The cafe was only open until 10 p.m., but it was quiet and no one from the media would notice them, so it was convenient for them to talk. Chapter 623. This is the scan the doctor gave Almighty Qin today. It's about his injury. The attending doctor said that he has to stop all competitions or his hand might not be able to play anymore. Bojiu stilled. In that moment she forgot to remove her mask. During the competition, no one had mentioned the Almighty's injury. But she had assumed that since he was able to participate in the competition again, it meant that he had recovered. Why, only you know about this, Feng Yi continued, tilting his head towards the window. Feng Yi continued, tilting his head to look out the window. Lin Feng and the others all thought that Almighty Qin had recovered. In fact, if the attending doctor hadn't called me, I wouldn't have realized it. The moment he said that, the atmosphere turned heavy. The atmosphere seemed to be heavy and neither of them spoke. Feng Yi wasn't sure how long had passed. The youngster sitting opposite him finally spoke, her dark eyes deep. Brother Mo won't give up on this competition, that's what he insists on. Feng Yi paused. You're right. I'll look for him tomorrow. With that, Bojiu stood up. I understand what you mean, he has to be treated first. Similarly, Bojiu knew what it meant for the Almighty to miss the National League. Bojiu realized she had been wrong. Back then, the Almighty had mentioned that he might be absent for 1 or 2 matches. She had assumed he was going to investigate Z. But after hearing Feng Yi's words, she understood that it wasn't because of the police but because his injury had reached a certain threshold. In order to prevent his opponents from finding his weakness at the start of the National League, he would be absent for the first 2 matches. It wouldn't be a problem during the regular games, but it would be a different story when it came to a professional competition. The faster the hand speed, the more severe the damage to the Almighty's hand. Moreover, the Almighty had used the 3000 knife cutting. Such a special technique didn't just depend on the opponent's speed but also the strength of the wrist. Hence, the pressure on the wrist would be felt indirectly. But once he entered the National League, it wouldn't be as easy as the regional competition, especially against Xianxia in the future. Regardless of whether it was a 1v1 or 5v5, the Almighty would lose if he didn't use the 3000 knife cutting. Based on her understanding of the Almighty, if he used 3000 knife cutting again, the consequences would be unimaginable. Even though the Almighty knew about it, he still decided to use it limitlessly in the semifinals, especially against Xianxia, for Supreme Alliance to win the national championship. He had long planned to use his future career in esports to exchange for it. Otherwise, the Almighty wouldn't have hidden his hand injury. Firstly, he didn't want anyone to stop him after finding out. Secondly, he didn't want anyone to feel burdened. From the start, Bojiu had said that she couldn't bear to see him lose and couldn't bear to see him walk down the altar. A person like the Almighty, handsome on the outside and perfect on the inside, shouldn't have such regrets. For the first time he felt sorry for someone else. Bojiu's thoughts were more important. Forgive her selfishness. The people around him were the most important. The youngster lowered his lids and opened his email on his phone. He paused all actions to track down the fake Spade Z and hid his tracks again. Chapter 624. The National League was around the corner. An overwhelming number of reports came flooding in. Just as Feng Yi had said, no one in the team knew about Qin Mo's hand injury. Many of them had been waiting for this day for a long time, be it the old members like Lin Feng or the new members like Shui Yaoyao. The National League wasn't just a competition to them. All the mockery disappeared. Or perhaps they could fight side by side. Shui Yaoyao couldn't explain her emotions. After a day of running, when she saw the day marked in red on the calendar, her heart beat slowly and solemnly. Xuanhu and Lin Feng were still practicing their hand speed. For the past 365 days, when others couldn't understand why they liked to play games, they had spent most of their time on it. There wasn't a single effort that shouldn't be fulfilled. But behind this kind of fulfillment, there was usually someone supporting them. The morning sun shone down gently. Almighty Qin hadn't expected to see the youngster sitting in his room the moment he opened his eyes. A certain someone was sitting by the window holding a glass of milk as she fed the cat. The cat obviously didn't want to talk to her. A certain someone poured some milk onto her hand, ignoring the cat's disregard as she placed it on her fingertips. One look and it was obvious that she hadn't kept any animals. Indeed, Bojiu hadn't kept any animals. After she had arrived, Movie Queen and had tasked her with waking the Almighty up and feeding the cat at the same time. She felt that it would be better to wait for the Almighty to wake up naturally, hence she had decided to feed the cat first. Who knew that the Almighty's cat would treat the handsome guy like dirt, giving him an arrogant expression. I'm going to shave your fur, let's see if you're still like this. Qin Imo, who had just woken up, heard the small threat. Qin Imo arched a brow. He had just woken up and his voice was hoarse but magnetic. Princess, come here. The cat heard his voice. It meowed immediately, pouncing towards the beautiful man on the bed. Where was the arrogance? Bojio placed the milk down, watching the fat cat. The big fat cat seemed to have sensed her gaze. He turned and shot her a look that said she was a stupid human, allowing her to experience it herself. Bojio smiled. Brother Imo, how about grilled cat claws for breakfast? Be careful, it might take it seriously and give you a claw. Qin Imo looked at the youngster and didn't have the slightest intention of getting up. Bojio arched a brow. You must be a female. It's male. Qin Imo caressed the cat's body with one hand and leaned against the headboard. Bojio paused. A male cat called Princess? What? Not good? Qin Imo raised his eyebrows. Bojio smiled. That's good. Princess, call one over. The big fat cat. Meow, this human with a suspicious aura. Don't think that I can't understand the smile in his voice. So what if a male cat is called a princess? What happened? Qin Imo glanced at the ball that had exploded in his hand, his brows twitching. How did you provoke it? It usually doesn't do this to boys. Because I'm not a boy. Bojio sat on the chair and placed her chin on the back of the chair. She glanced at the cat and thought that it must have smelled his scent. She smiled. I'm not sure. It's probably the first time we're meeting. He thinks I'm too handsome and is jealous.